Hello everyone, Lone Warfare, and welcome to the League Start episode for the Harvest in 3.11 Challenge League. Before we get into it, a quick announcement. The text releases of the Chaos Report will be back with the Harvest League Week 1 episode and following. The subreddit moderators have updated the rules, and as such, we're able to post our text posts again over on Reddit. So look forward to those about 2 to 3 days after each video release, as established in previous leagues. However, this episode, due to time constraints, won't have a text version release. I apologize for this inconvenience. For viewers that prefer an audio-only version of the Chaos Report, you'll be able to find it over on my Patreon for free, as per usual, of course. You'll be able to find a link to the voice-only versions in the description down below once it has been completed and uploaded. The audio-only version should be available immediately upon release. A quick reminder, you can also find the timestamps to each section in the pinned comment down below, and now also in the description. Do keep in mind that this entire video is based on educated guesses or predictions, and as such they might not be entirely accurate. Furthermore, I might miss a thing or two that might seem obvious to many, and for that I apologize. It's hard to cover everything after all. If I do miss something you think is important, leave it in the comments down below. And what that means, of course, is invest at your own risk. With the usual disclaimer out of the way, let's jump right in. In the first segment breaks down currencies and commodities, such as influence, exalted orbs, and fragments. We'll be covering the seeds and crafts of Harvest League in this section and future episode as well. I'll be giving my rough predictions for how the existing currencies will play out during the first few weeks, and over the course of the league in general in this episode. And as always, exalted orbs are first. The OG exalted orb is likely going to see a fair bit of turbulence throughout this league. Due to the nature of Harvest League and its mechanic entailing primarily a crafting focus, we'll likely see them swing together with the crafting meta as a whole. Expect them to jump up to around 80 to 110 chaos in the first 7 days, as that is the usual price range you can expect for them, regardless of league mechanic. After that point, it will depend entirely on the rarity of Exalt-like crafting seeds, as well as the availability of Delirium encounters. With Metamorph and Legion returning as Xanamods, it is also likely that we'll see a large influx of mid-tier currency such as Chaos Orbs. As a result, Exalted Orbs could become influenced by this influx around the 3rd week onward, once most players have the setup to properly invest in their maps with those mods. However, as always, a warning. A large portion of the Exalted market is owned by a very small percentage of the player base. The majority of the prices will be able to be influenced by them fairly easily. As a result, a lot of the predictions here may or may not be entirely accurate depending on their particular player base's whim. Take it as a rough guideline, and make sure to stock up on Exalted Orbs as early as possible in the league, as they are always more expensive than the first 5 to 7 days later on. And as always, make sure to check these prices hourly, as Exalted Orbs are a prime trading and stocking target very early on in the league. If you drop an Exalted Orb early, hold on to it unless you know what you're doing with it. Each day you hold on to it will usually increase the value of it by 20 to 30 chaos for the first week. So unless you can make more currency than that as a direct result of spending the Exalt, save it and let it passively accrue value. As for the Influence Exalted Orbs and the Awakener Orb, let's take a quick predictive look at them. While many of them will see a similar progression as the OG Exalt, we might be able to determine a few outliers ahead of time. The Hunter's Exalted Orb is usually one of these early in the league. During the first month, it usually reaches this peak and stays around there until it drops off hard around the 20 to 30 day mark. This results in a continuous downwards trend towards the rest of the league, with some seldom upticks due to the build meta changing slightly. With the new crafts potentially giving better crafting options than those for slamming the Exalt themselves, we might see an overall reduced price point for them as their demand goes down. Last league, the maximum price was around 445 chaos, but it sank down to an average of around 300 chaos for the remainder of the league past the first month. With the harvest crafting likely being a huge part of the crafting meta, we might see an overall price floor drop by about 100 chaos or so. As a result, don't invest in these early, unless absolutely necessary for your build. You will almost always get a better deal about 1 to 2 weeks down the line. Make the Hunter Influence items your last upgrade, in order to save yourself a decent chunk of currency. The Awaken Orb, on the other hand, is likely going to see an increase in general value, as the new Harvest crafting options can create single influence items, which can then be used with this orb to create further new bases and crafts. This will likely lead to the Awakener Orb at the very least retaining its price point of about 450 to 500 chaos throughout the league, as we've seen in Delirium. As I stated, they might however increase in prices due to the increased demand for crafting bases. Many players will likely start crafting that have never crafted before, or only very little. Since more players will be crafting, more bases will be required for them. It's pretty simple math, really. Keep an eye especially on the content creator side of things, and check out if there are any crafting guides in the works or newly released in order to predict the market movements of these orbs and bases. While I do not condone flipping, it is still recommended to keep an eye on this. Simply make sure that you don't buy them at their highest price point, and instead wait out the waves of buyers first that have resulted from potential crafting guides and videos until the supply replenishes itself. With Awakener Orb crafting being in more of a solved state from the get-go, so to speak, we're likely going to not see any drastically lower prices than last league as well. The addition of the harvest crafting does throw a bit of a wrench into the whole equation, but it will likely still be considered solved as we understand how different mods and influences interact with each other, regardless of other supplementary crafting methods. If you acquire one early on, consider holding on to it for a few days for the economy to catch up, or use it for early craft some nice items, to potentially cash in on the early bird bonus of item crafting. The economy of this orb usually reaches its early league peak around the 1 to 2 week mark, so consider selling them around that time. If you require a rundown how the Awakener Orb mechanics function, feel free to check out the Metamorph Week 3 episode of the Chaos Report. I cover the crafting mechanics of the orb in a fairly in-depth manner, and also link to further reading and video material in the description of that video. I will also likely be featuring a lot of this orb and the crafting with it in the future episodes when I cover the Harvest League crafts and seeds. The Crusader's Exalted Orb will likely see a similar curve to the Hunter's one. However, as the Crusader Exalted Orb is responsible for the Explosion chest piece mod, we might see an increase in demand for it, as this league is particularly focused around melee builds, which are notorious lovers for this particular mod. While the patch isn't exactly great for melee, GGG is still pushing this playstyle. Additionally, due to its solid mod pool, this is the most stable orb out of any of the Exalted Orbs in the entire game. It held itself around the 350 chaos area pretty much throughout the entire last league, barring the typical drop past the 2-month mark, of course. As a result, expect to get a rough idea for the overall pricing of this one about 1 to 2 weeks into the league. After that point, it usually only fluctuates a little bit, but no further than around like 20 chaos up or down. The Warlord's Exalted Orb, on the other hand, is exactly the opposite of the Crusader's Orb. It sees large rises and falls throughout leagues, often starting at an abhorrently pricey floor, sticking around it for about a month only to fall below even the Redeemer's Orb in value. This is likely caused by the mod pool being extremely good for early league builds and being rather poor for builds later on in the league. Additionally, last league was a huge exception due to the prevalence of the Herald stacking build, which caused the Warlord's Orb to lose any kind of value as it didn't offer the particular build anything. For this league, expect a similar price drop to the Hunter's Exalted Orb, as the last league mechanic might dig into the demand for it, while the supply will likely stay the same. Lastly, the Redeemer's Exalted Orb. The Redeemer Orb is always the cheapest of the Influence Orbs, as its Influence mod pool is simply not very popular among the players' builds. While it receives a few new mods last league from the Fossil rework, it still hasn't really had its time to shine. However, with the 3.11 patch changes and additions to the cold-based brand, we might finally see a surge in popularity for it after all. Keep a close eye on it for the duration of the league, as it's difficult to predict how the new introduction of abilities will affect the prices for this influence type. During the first month, especially weeks 2 to 4, we might see a big increase, as some of the mods are fairly popular for early league characters as well. If you get one early, hold on to it for a bit and just see how the price develops. As always, if you intend on buying any of these orbs just covered, make sure to keep an eye on this extremely volatile market space, and rank them in your order so you know which one is the best bang for your buck and which one is the best to invest into. Alteration orbs have seen their highest price ever, and will likely to do so again with this league. With the focus being heavily placed on crafting in this new league, we can expect alteration orbs to be extremely popular. Couple that with the apparent lack of additional drops from the league mechanic, and you get yourself the perfect recipe for extremely expensive alteration orbs. Cluster jewels will also require a lot more alterations to be properly crafted now due to the changes for the crafting weightings, which means the demand will increase even further. As a direct result, we can expect alteration orbs to be in incredibly high demand throughout the entire league, with an actual drop in supply compared to last league. This will likely lead to overall increased prices for them comparatively to leagues that we've seen so far. For the early league, it might be worthwhile to invest some of your currency into alteration orbs early, as most of the time you can still pick up 10 to 20 of them per chaos during the first few days, before they drop to a 7 to 1 or lower price point. Early bulking will likely be extremely worthwhile if these predictions come to pass. And this of course means that if you're sitting on a ton of alteration orbs, you should not sell them for these prices, as they'll increase over time, as I just pretty much mentioned. So please, don't do that. Unless I ask you, then definitely sell me alteration orbs. Thank you. Last on our list as always, the ancient orbs. With Nemesis being back as a Zana mod, you can expect these to go up in prices again, as is usual when a headhunter is chanceable. At average, ancient orbs have a price of about 40.5 chaos during leagues with the Nemesis mod, and about 17 chaos without the mod. As a result, we'll likely be seeing prices around the 30 chaos mark throughout the league, as the headhunter has seen a major change to its functionality, which will likely lead to a decrease in popularity for it overall. We're very likely not going to keep an eye on these throughout the entire league, but we'll check them out again in week 1 and likely week 2, just to see if our predictions came true. For the commodity section, we'll be covering the different fragment pieces as well as the synthesis and guardian map drops. The simulacrum fragments will also be covered in this section to keep an eye on their development throughout the league, as they are pretty new still. Shaper fragments have been a fairly lucrative piece of the market in the past league, as Shaper runs were essentially free due to the high prices of Uberwelder fragments. This league, we might see a drop in comparative prices to last league, as Shaper's loot pool has, nothing left in it that is worth more than a chaos. With the Starforge being heavily nerfed in comparison to other two-handed weapons that you'll be able to craft, the demand for it will be substantially lower than ever before, despite GTG's attempt to push two-handed melee matter. Solstice Vigil has also been entirely removed from the equation due to the hexbreak changes that affect the headhunter in a big way. Usually when the Nemesis mod is available, Solstice Vigils see a price increase comparatively to last league. This is very likely not going to be the case this time around, due to the aforementioned changes however. As a result, Shaper fragments might be cheaper to acquire, as the overall profit margin of running it could be diminished by the loss of value of the unique dropped by the fight itself. The Uberelder fragments have seen fairly steady prices throughout the entire last league, as the Uberelder uniques, especially 3 more Watcher's Eyes, have seen fairly high prices throughout the past league as always. A factor to this is that obtaining Uberelder fragments requires the Shaper boss fight to be completed at least twice. As such, each fragment has a certain minimum value that is dependent on the Shaper fragment values multiplied by a certain factor of potential tries required to get the given fragment. We will very likely see similar prices to last league to the Uberelder fragments, with higher prices in the beginning that will slowly teeter towards the end of the first few weeks. My advice would be to run your Uberelders early to get some of the high value unique items from the fight before the market gets saturated with them. Once there's a lot of them, it's oftentimes more valuable to just sell your fragments, but we'll take a look at the exact situation next week. The Elder fragments themselves were fairly cheap throughout the entire last league and will likely remain to be so for the next little while. The Elder boss fight does not seem to really drop any unique items that are still in high demand, and as such the prices are simply not going to be very high. Additionally, most of the fragments are very easy to acquire from the abundance of Elder influenced maps granted by Zana, and as a result, cannot be really in short in supply, once people reach the mid to high tier mapping stage of their characters. The best item you'll find in this encounter is the double mod Watcher's Eye. The best advice for this one is to sell it unidentified. You can usually sell it for a few exalted orbs and let someone else identify it for you. That way you get a guaranteed cash out, rather than identifying a terrible eye, which is what happens most of the time, and then getting like 5 chaos for it. So just sell it unidentified. It's usually the better choice. Lastly, the Synthesis unique maps will likely stick around as last league price points, or potentially drop slightly, as the Herald rings they primarily drop from have seen a nerf, and thus a decrease in demand. The Cortex, on the other hand, will likely continue to be the most expensive map in the entire game, due to the incredible drops it can provide in the Bottle Faith and the Baloney's mechanism. As such, make sure to properly check your Zana store on the regular, as she can sell this map for cheap to you, which will then allow you to either run it, or if you're strong enough, or sell it for a pretty penny to other players that might want to try the luck at a Bottle Faith drop. With those currencies and commodities covered, let's move on to the unique item watch list. I'll be listing a few unique items that you might not have considered when thinking about what unique items might become worthwhile in Harvest League. I'm purposely trying to avoid the most high visibility uniques, as those don't really need any shoutouts for you to know that they'll be expensive as always. One such example would be the Bot of Faith, like always. So, here goes. First up on our list, the Kintsugi. With the addition of the Winged Dancer keystone on the passive tree, we might see a slight increase in demand for this chess piece. It works incredibly well together with the keystone, which has been a very popular way to mitigate incoming damage in previous leagues, and might be another great way to do so in this league as well. As it's available to more players easily now, you might want to keep an eye on it. To acquire it, focus on the Deadly Rivalry Prophecy Chain. Once you've completed the 5th one, you'll get it as a drop. It's fairly simple, really. The Surrender Unique Shield is up next on the list, and is here due to a similar reason than the Kintsugi. With Glancing Blows also being added to the passive tree, one of the best shields in the game is hard to scoff at. It's always been quite the large popularity, but with the nerfing of dual wielding for melee and easy access to Glancing Blows for most melee builds, it could lead to an increase in demand for this item. Last league it had very tumultuous price graph, ranging anywhere from around like 100 chaos to upwards of 450 chaos. Whether or not we'll see such a large swing is questionable, but not entirely out of the question after all. To obtain this one, you'll be required to get yourself some All-Nitol Breachstones, as it requires the unique drop The Anticipation, coupled with one of his blessings to produce, and both of those drop in the Breachstones. Other uniques that could see a huge increase in popularity are the Void Forge and its series Disfavor. While the overall consensus for the 3.11 patch seems to be that melee is getting kicked in the liver again, GGG is pushing a two-handed meta, which will result in many casuals wanting to try out this playstyle. With most two-handed uniques being rebalanced and subsequently nerfed for the base buff, these two have somehow skirted the line and have not received any compensation nerfs for their upcoming buffs. As they were already very popular and powerful, we can assume that they will see an increase in prices and demand compared to last league. Void Forge drops from the Uber Elder boss fight, and its series Disfavor from Uber its series. As such, they're also gated behind some rather nasty boss fights for the early league and might be worthwhile to farm. You know, at least for a day or two. Last on the list is the unique jewel One with Nothing. With a large percentage of abilities being able to be used with the unarmed playstyle, and this particular jewel receiving a major crit chance buff through a bug fix, and not being nerfed at all, we're likely going to see a huge increase in demand for it. Additionally, as Facebreaker is simply not that good anymore due to the removal of many flat fizz benefits on most melee gems that could be used with it, it will likely replace it as well. Coupled with the fact that gaining this jewel is gated behind the Delirium League mechanic, which will now show up less frequently, as it's not Delirium League anymore, obviously, we got ourselves a good stew of this item will likely increase in prices. The best way to farm this one will likely be the Simulacrum encounter. Simply buy up the splinters or the finished fragments and just go ham. You'll probably make your money back anyway. Outside of those particular uniques, keep a close eye on the uniques related to the Necromancer playstyle. As with any league since 3.6, we will likely see a huge margin of the player base opt for the easy league starter route, or simply spamming minions at everything that moves until it's dead. Doesn't really matter how you want to phrase it, really. Of course, as mentioned earlier, outside of the uniques mentioned right here, there are a ton of uniques that will be extremely worthwhile and popular during the first weeks. However, I won't be listing them all here because otherwise this video will end up being about 3 hours long and I don't have the breath for that. Now, moving on to the third segment for this video, the meta predictions. Last league, we've seen a very weird shift in overall builds towards the middle of the league. As more and more players have opted to go with a Herald stacking build, which is now obsolete, less and less other builds existed. This league, GGG is pushing for a two-handed melee meta first and brown meta second. As my experience with GGG has told me anything, whenever a melee meta is pushed, it usually ends up being about the 5th or 6th best one, instead of the expected best or second best. As a result, we're likely not going to see a huge amount of two-handed melee users, but due to the players wanting to try out new skills and the pushed meta by GGG, we are going to see an increase. Even if slightly, like 3 to 5% or something like that. Many players will be opting into the Necromancer in minor playstyles again, as they're very cost effective, especially early on in the league, and many of those actually receive the buff. Looking at you, Necromancers. Expect around a 20 to 30% player base choosing to go this route, if previous leagues are anything to go by at all. One change that will likely occur throughout the league is a slight decrease in popularity for all the Cyclone-related builds. With the removal of the stun immunity, it made it a lot harder to set up a cookie-cutter cast-on crit Cyclone. While melee is likely unaffected by this, as many melee ascendances gain stun immunity anyway, cock builds have suffered dearly, now requiring outside source of stun immunity to continue their spinning motions. Please don't demonetize me. Outside of those few things, we'll also see a general increase in Brawn players, as they all want to check out the reworked and newly introduced Brawns. Especially Arcanist Brawn is going to see a lot of play later on, if it's not completely undertuned on release. As for the Atlas prediction, there are a ton of changes, but we'll have to see how they affect the overall strategies developed. With the Harvest League mechanic favoring quick maps and maps that are easy to scour for seed caches, tight, linear, and short maps will be the favored ones in this league. Maps that fulfill those requirements are Ashen Woods, Estuary, Fungal Hollow, Fields, Arcade, Shore, Beach, Strand, the always popular Jungle Valley, Cemetery, and potentially the newly reworked Spider Lair. If you are intending to go hard on the crafting aspect of the league, consider choosing one or two of those maps for your preferred map system. Aside from those general map recommendations, be extremely vigilant when it comes to selecting the right area of the Atlas. Atlas bases specifically will likely see a huge spike in demand this coming league, as they'll be prime real estate for the incredibly powerful crafting options provided by the Harvest mechanic. One thing to keep in mind as well is that Delve will likely be less popular than in previous leagues. This, coupled with the fact that Harvest League does not seem to grant many drops themselves, might lead to an overall increase in prices for maps, as less will be readily available at all times. With the Meta and Atlas predictions finished, we'd have a strategy discussion segment here normally. However, as is tradition with the prediction and league start episodes, I'll instead be giving a long list of early league tips and tricks for you instead, so you might have an easier start into your league. The Chaos Recipe. As per usual, the Chaos Recipe will be your number one moneymaker early on if you're a fast leveler. While it becomes fairly useless over the course of the first few days during the early league times, this recipe alone can make you multiple dozen exalts if done right. Once you reach the Blood Aqueducts, you can start putting together Chaos Recipes with the rares dropped there. Considering that most exalted orbs early on cost about like 20 to 40 chaos if you're fast, you can easily get one exalt for every like 10 to 20 hand-ins. Sell extra maps. Especially during the beginning of the league, people will try to finish their Atlas as fast as possible. Oftentimes they won't mind paying horrendous prices for that one map that they require to finish a sector. And as such, once you've gained the bonus objective on any given map, just sell the rest of them immediately. The prices will drop drastically over the first few days, so the earlier you sell your axes, the more currency you can make on them. Resist jewelries and rings in general. Early on, these jewelry items in particular are ridiculously worthwhile to identify and sell, as everyone will require a decent amount of resists right after they're done leveling. They sell like hotcakes and are often worth 20 plus chaos for any decent total resist rolls above 100%. Oftentimes you don't even need any other rolls on it, something like energy shield or life, and the resistances themselves are more than enough to make up those currencies. Problem solvers. These are good throughout the entire league, really, but especially early on. Problem solvers are items that have a very high individual stat. For example, 80% cold resistance, or like 100 dexterity. These items are amazing for people that need to fix a problem in the current build, hence the name. These items can be sold for a really high amount, as there are rarely any with those particularly high stats available on the market, and the person buying it has no other option. As such, these can easily sell for 50 plus chaos in the first week or two, and really throughout the entire league. Invest your chaos. The earlier you start to invest your liquid chaos into guaranteed to rise currencies such as Divine Orbs, Exalted Orbs, or Alteration Orbs, the better. Every hour you have chaos sitting in your stash that does nothing is wasted passive income you could have gotten by simply converting them. So do it. Flip the maps from Zana's shop. As last league, this will still be an incredibly lucrative option, especially at higher tier maps. You only have to open the Zana map inside of the map you're running to reset the shop. You do not have to enter it, nor do you need to complete a mission at all. This makes it extremely easy to cycle through a shop in quick succession, using yellow or even white master missions and maps. Maps from T6 to Tier 14 are usually all worth flipping in this manner, netting a ton of easy profit per map on average in this fashion. you can flip through a few dozen maps in a matter of minutes. Only prefer 2 out of 3 maps. As the preferred map system launched last league, which I've mentioned previously as well, I would imagine it to be fairly lucrative to only prefer 2 out of 3 possible prefers on your favorite maps, and saving the third one for whatever map the community seems to have decided on as being meta this league. This will guarantee you a steady income by selling those chosen community maps, while you still get to run your favorite map in succession. Harvest Craft Jewelry. With the addition of many, quote-unquote, targeted crafts, such as defenses or resistances, it will be extremely profitable to throw a few jewelry items into those crafts if you got nothing else to use them on at the time. Couple this with the previously mentioned resist and problem solver tips for maximum effect. Don't waste any of the target crafts by condensing them. Simply throw it in a jewelry item instead, make some quick profit. Cluster Jewel Crafting. As with the Delirium League, you can expect to make an absolute ton of currency by identifying what cluster jewel nodes are used by players and which ones are in low supply. This was by far the most lucrative crafting option last league, and will likely continue to be for this league as well. Keep a close eye on especially Summoner, Warcry, and brand related cluster jewel notables, and jump on the first chance you see to make large sums of currency. The weekly Delve update will resume next episode. It is likely that we'll see a large decline in Delve popularity, as the Harvest League mechanic does not interact with the Delve in any way as far as we can tell. As a result, if you intend on getting your seeds and crafts leveled up, you will want to spend as little time in Delve as possible. This might heavily affect the supply of fossils and resonators, as less players will be hard farming Delve in order to meet the demand. I'll update you on this in next week's episode, when we take a look at how these predictions came to pass, of course. And with those last few tips wrapped up, I'll be ending this Chaos Report. I hope this video was informative and you learned something from it that you can apply to your own game. Please let me know if I missed anything or you would have wanted me to talk about anything specific that I might not have covered. If you want to support the creation of these videos, feel free to check out my Patreon, and maybe consider signing up for it. You can find a link to it in the description down below. Any and all support is highly appreciated. You can also find a link to my Twitter and Discord down below in the description as well, in case you want to interact with me a little bit more. And of course, don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell thingy, like and dislike the video, and check me out over on twitch.tv/LemeWolf. I stream pretty much every day and will be live throughout the entire launch window. If you need background noise, I'll gladly be yours. Also, I'm doing a giveaway at the end of the league launch stream that anybody can join for a, I think Insatiable Malice supporter pack or something like that, the red one. You can find a link to the stream in the description down below. And with that, thanks for watching, and keep farming those exors.